Sydney Opera House, the Royal Albert Hall, Durham Cathedral, and many in New York. The Washington Post had described her music as stupendous, and The Guardian praised her gorgeous orchestral score for Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which is also a fantastic game, and you should definitely try it out if you have not. It's a great game. Jessica has written and presented the primetime radio show High Score on Classic FM and The Sound of Gaming on BBC Radio Free, taking game music to a national audience. She also writes and hosts live events, including an evening of Sony PlayStation soundtracks at the Royal Albert Hall and the BBC Concert Orchestra at Vale. Just to add that if you've never been to the Royal Albert Hall, that's like holy ground of music. So it's quite amazing, even just to attend there, to listen to music, let alone your music being performed there. So it's quite something. In late 2018, she was commissioned by the Royal Shakespeare Company and Magic Leap to work on the Seven Ages of Man, a mind-bending, beautiful AR experience, which was selected for Sundance Film Festival in 2019 as part of their New Frontier program. She wrote the music for the Apple Design Award winning game Little Orpheus, again a fantastic game you should check out, which has been described as a serious contender for the best orchestral game score of 2020, masterful. Jessica was London Oriana Choir's composer in residence in 2018, and she was selected for the PRSF's new music biennial, do I say it right?
Yeah.
Biennial, which took place in London's South Bank and Hull in July 2019. The piece She Who has recently been chosen as one of the PRSF's most significant commissions in the series and will be performed in Coventry and London in 2022. Last year, she premiered Echo, a new work commissioned by Crouch End Festival Chorus at Alexandra Palace, described in the press as tender, moving, and beautiful. She's currently completing new work commissioned for Aura Singers, premiering at Cambridge Early Music, and is working hard on multiple game soundtracks. Jessica is regularly into the radio and television. She even dared to face Jerry Prexman on a Christmas University Challenge and was delighted to have survived the experience. We are delighted that you have survived that experience. So I think anyone who knows anything about music, just a list of those venues and events and festivals and awards, and I mean, it's just mind-blowing. And I mean, again, we know each other for a long time, and I know I'm biased, and I love you, I love your work, but like so many of the games that you wrote, it's just your music just elevated to a whole another level. So we're really excited to have you here. And what you don't see is that it's a fantastic trade show here for the university students. It's a really good event.
Yeah. Hi, Jessica. I'm Nick. Very nice to meet you. I feel like I know you so well now.
I know, I've got imposter syndrome from my own life hearing that.
So, when I was very young,
it was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. My father used to go away and sail around oil tankers and go to Singapore. And I remember one year he came back with 2 cassette tapes. One was Star Wars, and the other one was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And that entire holiday in France, all I did was sit in his car, draining his battery, listening to the soundtracks over and over again, to the point where now, whenever I'm writing dialogue or I'm writing a big piece, I have to listen to film score to I suppose, elevate my ability to write. What was the kind of entry point for you in terms of scoring? What was your kind of, first childhood piece that I suppose sparked the passion?
I was a very morose and sad child, and always loved music that I think was beyond my years. And like you say, something that touches you as a child. I loved Morricone before I knew who Morricone was. I loved the Coventry Carol, which is the saddest carol ever written amongst a plethora of extremely positive Christmas music. So I always had that feeling, I think, of being tuned to the harder things in life, and I think that's why Dan and I, to skip way forward, started the Chinese Room, because we wanted to tell stories in games in a way that you couldn't in other mediums, and it wasn't that we thought there was a lack. I mean, you know, Dan's an inveterate gamer, he loves games, but we wanted to tell the profound stories, the sad stories, the stories of non-heroes. I was particularly interested in that, and I think that's been a thread throughout my career since I was a child, going, music's so human, it touches us on such a profound, beautiful level, and my work in the games industry has been a continuation of striving for that feeling of being touched by music.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as a narrative, you know, and being in charge of the narrative, I keep saying to the team, let's use less words. Let's tell the story. As a narrative director, I want to tell the story through multiple mediums. And for me, music is a big part of that medium. It kind of can express emotion far quicker than words can in some respects, right? So I think that's really interesting. So your approach to music and the use of that to tell narrative within the Chinese Room projects, can you talk us through your process for, I suppose, attaching narrative to music?
Well, it's really interesting what you say about less words, and the motto of the Chinese Room is always show, don't tell, which is very common for lots of people who create. You know, you've kind of failed, I think, if you're often telling it in words. You should trust the player or the viewer to kind of understand intuitively what you're trying to do, and that was a big part of the Chinese Room, was saying gamers are really smart. And often they're so played down to in terms of intellect, intelligence, references, and we thought, anyway, the sort of moniker of gamer I found really strange, because I don't identify myself as a reader. I don't say I'm a theatreer, and so game always felt really strange to us. It was just, like I say, we both love games, but we wanted to be able to tell those stories pulling from performance art, sound art, theatre, literature, film, other games. It was a big melting pot, and I think that's what people responded to in terms of narratives. It was kind of freeing ourselves of, this is a game, and so therefore you have to use gamic conventions. We pulled from all kinds of places, and I see that more and more, actually. And we weren't the first, we weren't innovative in what we did, and of course the big question, are games art, should they be art? We were never trying to make a big statement. It was very selfish, like most acts of creation are, when you're freed from commercial interest. It was, what are we interested in saying? What do we want to get out into the world, and how do we best tell those stories? And as ever, it's about assembling great teams and letting them run with what they're good at, and being very light touch.
I'm just going to say that I think Jessica characteristically humble. I do think that Dear Esther is a pivotal work in the games industry, and not just the fact that how many people copied you, the genre and the way of telling a story, but I think it even reached out of it. I've heard people who don't do games, but they work in immersive theater, and they mention Dear Esther as a specific piece of work that inspired them. So I just want to correct you, because you're wrong about yourself. I think it is.
We're talking about genre, which is an uncomfortable word sometimes. It's a commercialised word, but I don't think there would be a walk-em-up genre were it not for Dear Esther. And actually, I know that many of the students from my time here, wanted to kind of emulate that experience of it's enough to tell a story within this medium without gamifying it, without having a kind of gamified objective, which is fairly typical for us, which is, often they'll say, where is the challenge? Well, narrative should challenge you. It doesn't have to be a gamified challenge.
So I'm just going to slightly change the topic from going historical to practical. One of the things which we see happening is that there are some developers who are very musically driven, and Nick is not exaggerating. Like, you can't get into his car and not have great music on. Like, it's every single time. So it's very true.
I should tell you, one time when I got into the car with a friend, we were in Milton Keynes, and we drove out, and I forgot that I had the music accidentally turned up to 100%, and Star Wars came on, and that main theme crescendo, we almost crashed the car. But that's just another. I think my eardrums haven't recovered.
So there are people like that, but there are also developers who think that kind of music or even audio in general is an afterthought. And I've always been puzzled by that, right? And I was speaking with a few people, and a very interesting pattern emerged that knowingly or unknowingly, they just didn't understand music, right? And I think for some people it felt too complicated and it felt scary and whatever. Like, now obviously you are intimately understanding music, but do you have any advice for people who might be scared, maybe is the wrong word, but they feel uneducated, and how can they get into it, and how can they make good musical choices for the game?
It's such a good question, and it's really interesting. I went to the National Film and Television School, and we were, as the composers, constantly being taught how to understand the language of film, but the directors were never asked to step into the world of how to talk to a composer. I think that would be a really useful class, because I think when you do have that intimate, trusting relationship, great things come out of that. I'd say that a lot of people start with, I want it to sound like this. That for me is a really big no-no, because, okay, let's say we start with John Williams or Thomas Newman. So you're starting with something that has had a budget of millions of pounds, and then you're on an indie game that has a budget of maybe £30,000. That isn't achievable, and nor should you be striving towards it, I don't think. So I think it's a mistake that often people make, and it sets composers off on the back foot, because you're like, of course I can't do that. And then immediately there's a defensive relationship. I think what is more useful is to talk about emotion. What do you want the player to be experiencing at a certain point in the game? What do you want the overall emotional arc of that player experience to be? So as soon as you start saying, this is a really terrifying space, but actually I don't think we need more frightening music here, I kind of want to play against that. I want to kind of evoke a sense of playfulness within it. As soon as you start talking about experience, it's a commonality of language that you both have. So you don't need to be saying, it's got, I want this to be, allegro with, semiquavers. You don't need that musical language. You just need, I think, a shared emotional language. And I think that's a really helpful place to start. I think people are often shocked when I put budgets in front of them about how much it costs to record good players. So I think having an understanding before you talk to a composer, kind of educating yourself on how much it costs, what a musician union rates, that kind of thing, or at least having a better poker face when the composer tells you what they are, so you don't look so bereft and angered. And I think also having references outside a specific piece of music, talking even about a piece of music. What I liked about this piece of music is that the composer evoked a sense of mystery. So you can use music, that's absolutely fine, but saying I want it to sound like this, you're not going to get the best out of your composer, because hopefully you've hired them for their unique voice and you like what they do. So I think that's a more useful way of talking about it.
It's not enough, is it, to say I want an exciting beat because I want the player to feel excited. It's what is the character of the music at this moment in time? Who is it representing? What is it representing? And how do you want, what emotion do you want it to kind of drive? I think that's very important.
And I think also, sorry,
no, please.
Just to finish off that, embedding a composer as early on as you can afford to in the project will yield great results. And I'm really fortunate in that, because I was running the Chinese room, I had an overview of all disciplines, and I'd say as a composer, you should be talking to the designers directly if you can. If you have a creative director who allows that kind of conversation, you should be talking to the programmers. The more integrated into a team you can be, the more you understand what they do. I've talked about people understanding what composers do. Actually, it's really important that we understand that some of the choices we make musically may create huge technical headaches for other people. So actually just talking to people, meeting the team, finding out where their passions lie. And if you've had a fruitful and lovely conversation with a programmer, they're going to be more likely to want to implement your music in a sensitive way rather than just floating on top of everything. And I think that goes into what kind of composer or creator in general do you want to be? Do you want to be... I've got friends who are machines. They're on 8 or 9 projects simultaneously. They care, but they're not embedded. They're good, they're really good. They're, what I would call commercial composers. Do you want to be that kind of creator? Do you want to be someone who is led by their heart and a passion project? I only take on one project at a time because I can't give the best of myself. So this is advice that goes outside music and being in the games industry. Dan and I were talking yesterday, I'm not at the Chinese room anymore, but Dan was saying, we have people who do a fantastic job, but they are in and out, and their priority is they've got a job where they live near home, they get to see their kids. That's what they live for. That doesn't mean they're worse at their jobs, but you kind of have to decide what kind of creative person you want to be and what you want to put into it, I think.
So I couldn't agree more. We were just talking earlier in another panel about career objectives and what you're trying to achieve and understanding yourself of what you want to get out of it. And for some people, they say, I want 9 to 5 and I like this, but it's just a job. And some people are super passionate about it, right? And I think the same, you need to understand what you want from individual parts, so the art, the music, every part of your game, of what is it that you really care about and what the artists you work with. As you said, I worked with composers who were like that you drop in the coin at the top and out falls in the bottom music, right? And there is diminishing returns as well. Like there are certain places where, no, you do not need to record with a full orchestra in Abbey Road, but maybe you can do something else, right? So when I started with digital entertainment, we were making, back in the late 80s, we were making music on the Commodore Plus 4 and the Commodore 16 by ruining the disk drive, because we were rotating the disk and it was making a buzzing sound, and we made music with that buzzing, and that was the music. We came a very long way from that, right? And obviously music changed a lot. In particular, a lot of dynamic music we're talking now, where the music is adapting and different themes come in and out, what's happening in the gameplay. So rather than a film composition, which is a set piece, you know exactly what's going to be on the screen, you go to this. How do you find this? I'm sure that there is pros and cons as a composer to both, that you're taking a set piece and one that is dynamic. How do you find this work?
So when I came into the games industry, I didn't know anything about games music, and Dear Esther is essentially written as a linear score. It has zero interactivity in it. It is literally a tripwire. You trigger a certain place in the game, that music is going to play every time. Now what's really interesting to me is that people still love that score. 10 years, it's been 10 years, unbelievably, in February. And of course, making a walking simulator has very limited requirements for interactivity, so we could kind of get away with that in a way that you couldn't with other more dynamic games, with more traditional gameplay in. But it taught me something really important, and I argue endlessly with other games composers about this, who are on the other end of the spectrum of technicality and interactivity and procedural music, and it has to have all the bells and whistles. But what I learned from Dear Esther is that actually what people love is the emotional heart of your music. And I'm not being advocating ignorance or lack of education or educating yourself, because as I've grown as a games composer, having those tools at your in your arsenal are very, very useful. You know, I do use interactivity to help me be a better games composer, but actually I will never sacrifice the emotional heart of a cue to make it more interactive. Now, someone like Olivier Riviere, we talk all the time. He is, I think, an absolutely fantastic composer. He's obsessed. That is his passion, are the systems that lay behind the game music. And he combines both really well, which is what I like about his music. But sometimes I think there's a lot of games music that I do find frustratingly wallpapery, because it's pandered so far to the demands of interactivity. For me, it's lost something quite fundamental.
Interestingly enough, recently I spoke with someone, a mate who is a chef at a Michelin star restaurant, and he said the exact same thing basically, just replace music with food. And he said, like, you can do all this fancy stuff, but good food is good food. Like, yes. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you do with the presentation. If it's not good food, it doesn't matter, right?
It requires, music requires time, I suppose, like food to heat up and cool down, or whatever. You know, if it's too instant switching between action and quiet, you just end up with schizophrenia, don't you? And you're kind of, score. It can be terribly dangerous. So I suppose.
I also think that it can be so subtle that no one cares or notices.
Yes.
You can have the opposite problem. Everyone on the team is going, we've built the most complicated, interactive audio system known to mankind. And one player out of a million may notice it. And I think, but you did all that for yourselves. It was kind of, a creative act of slight onanism, because if it isn't serving the player, why have you done it? And I think for me, that's the exciting thing about making games and making art and creating is it's an act of communication. It isn't, like, I get asked a lot of interviews, what's your technical setup? And I say, well, I've got a piano. And I've got Logic. And they go, but what are your plugins? And what samples have you got? And I'm like, oh, nothing. I've just got some cheap little samples so I can sometimes mock it up. But actually, I think it's quite easy in a technical industry to be seduced by all the things that you need to create. And Dear Esther, going back to that, was a game that was made using constraints. It was set on a small island. That wasn't a creative choice. That was, what can we afford to build? It's a walkable around within a certain time frame. We can't build that much art. All of those, the music was 5 players because that was what I could afford. It wasn't a creative choice, and I think sometimes the games industry really frustrates me because it has this obsession with polish. And actually, what a lot of indie games have shown over the last 10 years particularly is, yeah, people love that end of it, but it's like the film industry. People will also watch or listen to something lo-fi and created in your bedroom. And I think it's really important to remember that when you're starting out. You don't have to be aspiring to a AAA aesthetic in every way. You can do something more interesting, more revolutionary, more controversial than just following the big buck model of creation.
Just because you can doesn't mean to say you should. And often we see this within films, when a project has too much money and too much time, often it strips something out of the creativity. That for a creative effort to have value, it has to have constraint. It has to have something to risk, something to kind of set it back, otherwise it loses meaning. We've seen, of course, over 20, 30 years, film score has now become a kind of mainstream piece of entertainment which you can enjoy outside of the medium of the film itself. It was really interesting, we were talking about the Albert Hall. Obviously the Proms is now hosting a video game concert, a video game score. How did you feel about that? And this is clearly something for us to celebrate in terms of our music being recognised in its own right.
So I've been campaigning for this prom for the last 7 years behind the scenes. I have talked to everybody. I met with David Pickard, who runs the proms. We had a very interesting meeting on his views on games music. So I'm really, really thrilled and quite surprised that it's finally happening. My music's in it, which is amazing. Yeah, I've done, and a lot of people have done a lot of work to make that happen. And that's, again, the games industry has lots of downsides. It also has very, very passionate fans who believe in the cultural relevance of gaming as an industry, and not only its financial pulling power, but what it adds creatively to the UK. And I think it's still really frustratingly slow, but actually we're getting to a point where people now who are curating and choosing media are now games players. That's what's changed, is that people our age are now starting to run things. And when people in their 60s, they wouldn't even give any time to games. But now, as people get younger who are in charge, terrifyingly, that happily is really changing. So I just want it to keep going. It's so exciting.
The Dead to Rights scores made it into that proms, isn't it? Is that right? Dead to Rights?
Sorry, that's a game we worked on called Dead to Rights, and no, it
was all Vietnam, wasn't it?
It doesn't make it into. So it's quite interesting. So I had the Royal Albert Hall, of course, it's a magnificent building, and it's right next to the Academy, and it's just wonderful to be there. And if you're ever in London, I strongly suggest you go there because it's very near the V&A and a couple of other museums. It's a beautiful part of London. And recently I was there for a concert which was about footage recorded in space. And there was a live performance. This weekend I'm going back to the Albert Hall. This time it's Lord of the Rings with a live orchestra playing. And I was thinking, why aren't there games here? Because it's a beautiful visual medium with beautiful music, and they absolutely belong on that stage. So, I think, changes.
So anyway, the ticket, I realised I hadn't booked myself any tickets for the prom that my music is being performed in. So I rang for some tickets, and it had been on sale for less than 48 hours, and said it's very, very, very nearly sold out. So I have very poor tickets. But one of the arguments was nobody will come, and I said, you have no idea how many people want to come to this.
You're up in the nosebleeds. It happens to me
I'm up in
sometimes.
the nosebleeds.
when you're too late, yes.
Can I quickly talk about, this is really going off piece now, something I haven't been asked about, but is a very, very relevant issue for composers at the moment, very briefly.
Yes, please go ahead, please go.
So one of the reasons you haven't heard much of my music recently is that the contracts I'm being offered are really shockingly poor and many times illegal in terms of companies wanting complete buyouts for composers. I say no to them, and I lose a lot of work as a result. And it's kind of just a plea for anyone who's thinking about getting into the industry. We have to stick together. We're stronger together. They can't do it to us if we all say no. It's really difficult at the beginning of your career to say no to opportunities. I really understand that. But bad things are happening to games composers at the moment. And watch out for bad contracts. If they want your PRS and your MCPS rights, that's currently enshrined in law that they shouldn't do that. Join the MU, join the Ivor Novello Foundation, get a music lawyer if you can afford it. It's really depressing what's happening, but I also want to be really honest about it because it's a huge issue for many of us at the moment. So that's my little rousing left-wing speech, and everybody knows it wouldn't be me if I didn't get something slightly controversial and very left-wing into a chat.
I don't think it is controversial in the sense that, it's not controversial if it's right, but it's, I've done a lot of work with independent studios and getting them to prepare for, financing and publishing and saying, look, you have to be aware if you work with a composer on contract how that works, and if you want to own any part of that, you have to pay for the rights to own that. We have to negotiate what the commercial rights of that is going to be post video, especially because increasingly the audience wants to own the music separately from the game and listen to that and enjoy that separately.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a really very important part of the process. And at the point where apparently the biggest companies are the ones who are affording that, or they're doing that in-house or whatever, it's very important that independent composers have that power. So I would second that completely. And obviously we don't. In my time in academia, we don't see a huge number of composers coming through. Obviously, there's a lot of people who come through audio effects and things like that, which is a different medium. And very often, they don't want to mix the two. You don't necessarily want the composer to be doing the effects at the same time and doubling up on that work. What would your advice? Okay, so that's one piece of advice. What's your other advice for those who are composing for games and setting out into that career? What's the kind of foundation they need to be building?
So I've lost you visually, by the way, but so if I'm looking a little bit vague, it's because I can't see, but I can hear you still. I get sent a lot of audio show reels, and I try and listen to as many as I can. And I get sent a lot of stuff that sounds exactly the same, and it's poor man's Hans Zimmer. And what I would say is no one is ever going to out-Zimmer the Zimmer.
With this massive bank of computers.
Yes, and people.
Yeah.
He's got 200 people working in a studio. So I know people say a lot. Someone wrote to me, because I always give the advice, have your own voice, it's really important. And then someone wrote to me and said, but no one wants my voice. And they keep saying, can you make it sound like someone else? And that is also an option. I think that will get you to a certain point in your career. But actually, the people that I know have succeeded as games composers and independent creators of all kinds of, not just in games, they have their own style, they have the confidence to say, this is what I do and I do it well. So that's one thing. I would say learn how to say no. It's not always, it feels when you're young, like you have to say yes to everything, and that's useful up to a certain point. But actually, I think you can waste a lot of time. And I think it's really useful to be open to things that you weren't aiming for, but also to have a kind of focus, to know where you're trying to go. Like we were saying before, of do I want to work in a large studio? Do I want to be an in-house composer or designer or programmer or whatever? Or do I want to be independent? Do I want to work on small indie passion projects? So to really think about that. I'd say it's a small industry. The word gets around very quickly if you're difficult to work with. But I know I'm going to be equivocal, but also on the other side of that, I was listening to a podcast with Minnie Driver this week, and she said, every person that I've heard describe me, male, describes me as difficult. And I've definitely been on the wrong end of that as a woman or a marginalised person in any way, you're going to get the D word more than most people if you're different in any way. So be amenable but have limits, know what's wrong. I'd say to women in the industry, find your tribe, find your people, because it's an industry that still holds a lot of discrimination and bullying within it. The stronger you are within any kind of unionisation or friendship groups or BAME groups or women groups, or I've got a disability, so I try and talk to those people. Find your people, because it is like any creative industry, it has its dark side. So don't be afraid to say no. Trust your gut. If something makes you feel uncomfortable, don't do it. And I know that's really hard advice, but I also want people to be realistic about the industry. I've had some really bad, I've had amazing things, I've had the best opportunities, and I've made money. I've also had the most difficult, challenging upsetting things happen to me, and I want people going into the industry, especially if they're marginalised in any way, to be able to protect themselves. That is so important. Value yourself.
No one should be stepping into any creative industry at any cost simply to say that they work in the industry, right? There has to be a way of doing it on your terms.
And again, that's really easy to say when you're saying it from a position of privilege. But even as a woman who is a mum, that has created endless issues in terms of, I have an expectation that I will see my child. And a lot of the male composers I know have been more successful because they're willing to do the 6.5-day weeks that the film and games industry demands of them. I didn't want to do that. I couldn't do that, partly because I've got a disability, partly because I wanted to be a present parent. So I have made choices and I have sacrificed things. I've also spoken out against publishers for marginalised groups. It all costs something, and I suppose, even though it's the most hippie-ish thing to say, be true to yourself and be an ally. Because there's a lot of guys in this industry who don't step up, and in where you're a glorious example of someone that isn't truthful, and I really thank you for it. You always are there saying the difficult stuff, and we need more people that are willing to say, that's wrong, don't say that to her, let him go home. So if you're in any position of power, it behoves all of us, I think, to try and make it a better industry for everyone.
Completely.
Always try and be neutral and say nothing, and always end up on a big soapbox.
Got to be who you are, right?
So I think that something which is, it's a difficult topic to talk about, right? Because what you're saying is absolutely true about making choices. I guess you still can't see us, right?
I can't see you. I'm trying to find a way of seeing you.
I don't know.
Pressing random buttons.
Don't worry. It could be. No, it could be on our side. Try not to worry about it. Sorry. So I think the challenge is, especially someone starting their career. I know that when I started, it was very difficult to make choices because A, I didn't know what I'm talking about, and B, even when I knew what I'm talking about, I didn't trust myself. So there were times when I look back, I was like, I was right, but I didn't trust it because I was inexperienced. And so oftentimes I know I covered up the unknowing by volume. So it's like I thought, I'm spread betting. I'm gonna say yes to everything, and then something is gonna stick. Something is gonna be good. So, and I know that it's very difficult. Do you think that from a purely artistic, and I don't think it's just for musicians, I think it's for game designers, I think it's all sorts of game developers, of that, how can they make that artistic decision, that are they heading the right way or not? It's an impossible question, I'm aware, but is there any guidance you can give of someone who's inexperienced and, let's say, heavy imposter syndrome and all that how can they know when to listen to their gut, and is there some guideline here?
I think, one, it's really important if you're starting out in your career to know that everyone is winging it. Like when you read, like I said, when you're reading out my biog, I was cringing going, that's so much to live up to. I can only fail from this. That never goes away. Except that if you're a creative person who makes things, you're probably always going to be a little screwed up and worried that you're not as good as other people. So let's just get that off the table. And then for me, it goes back to what you're prepared to do. So Dan and I didn't have any money for a very, 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 very long time in our careers. So we only became successful in our 40s. So that was a long time of raising a kid with no money, doing other jobs that we didn't really want to be doing because we wanted to make the art we wanted to make, and that was a choice. But not everyone wants to live the life of a starving, bloody, struggling artist. It was hard. Every year was hard. Every month was hard. But we were like, we're going to make something that we believe in, and we always did that. So again, it's defining what you want. And like I say, trying to find a balance between, like you say, there was a great value in seeing what sticks, being open to everything, going, that was a disaster, but my God, it was fun. But I also think, again, it's a bit of it's something of a privilege sometimes to give out all this advice, and I probably would have rolled my eyes at my you know, when I was 20 myself speaking now. So I think everyone just has to go, what are they prepared to give to make the things they want? And yeah, maybe that will be getting a second job and making all kinds of sacrifices. You know, we didn't have any holidays for like 7 years. We didn't go anywhere. We just lived in the worst part of Portsmouth in one room struggling with a baby. Hey lad, it was hard when I was young. And this group, this generation are coming out into a far harder world than we were. They've paid for their own education, which shocks me. I was given money to go to the National Film School. You know, I was paid to go. And that is a utopia that these people don't have. So, yeah, just follow your instinct. Trust yourself creatively and as a person.
Absolutely solid advice. Jessica, it's been a real pleasure for me to meet you and talk to you, and I hope that at some point soon we can meet in person and maybe talk over some projects. So I think that would be really lovely. So thank you very much indeed. I know, Imre, you want to say the last words, but thank you from myself.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, so just the last thing is that if you have a chance to play the games that Jessica worked on, you absolutely should. But as a quick shortcut, basically, I think in most music players, a lot of her music is available. So do go on Spotify or whatever, find her work. I think bunches on YouTube as well. I strongly recommend you listen to it because this really is a masterclass in composing and production of music. So yeah, thank you, Jessica. We are very grateful that you gave us your time and all the music that you created. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, and good luck to everyone who wants to work in the wacky, wonderful world of games. I wish everyone the very best. It's, as well as being hard, it is also the best job in the world. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica. All the very best. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.